You've just created a new Dataverse environment. But what happens deep inside Power Platform to make that environment automatically scale up or replicate or back up so that you can use it without worry? Today, Sri Nair talks about the planet scale infrastructure used to maintain millions of Dataverse environments 24 hours a day, every single day. Today on PowerCat Live. Welcome to PowerCat Live. My name is Phil Topnos of the PowerCat team, and today I'm here with Sri Nair, Principal Group Product Manager from the Dataverse team. Hey, Sri.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Phil.
I'm excited what you're going to talk about because, a lot of people have heard about Dataverse or used it, but they don't know it the way you do, and we're going to get deep under the covers. But before we do that, talk a little bit about your background. Your journey through Microsoft and how you got this job?
I started with Microsoft about 10 years ago. Started on the Microsoft 365, used to be called as Office 365 team earlier. A little over 5 years ago, I came over to what was called earlier as CRM Online. And people who know about Dataverse know about a little bit about the history. And then for the last 2 to 3 years, they've been kind of deeply engaged into Dataverse infrastructure, licensing, and business model aspects of it. So that's a little bit about me so far.
I can see why you're so well suited for this. So let's talk a little bit about Dataverse then. So Dataverse is the cloud native data platform in Power Platform. One of the questions that we'll often get is, hey, if I'm already using Azure, why don't I just deploy a database in Azure? Why do I need Dataverse?
Database, Dataverse, everything sounds quite similar here. And I would say there's a difference. Like I always like to say, does the apple and pineapple sound same, but they both are different. They taste different, right? So these two are two different things. And I want to kind of demystify some of that in the video today. More specifically, I will clarify from the platform side of things and the infra side of things on what it takes to make a Dataverse experience live for a citizen application developer as well as for a professional developer. Inside the box here, first we have the whole compute layer, which is basically the infrastructure that supports your API tier where you're kind of hitting it, be it connectors, be it through SDK, be it through your UCI client, or even for that matter, Power Apps or Power Automate.
Right.
All those clients that you're using come to Dataverse through this API interface, and they run on a massive scale of compute that we have to deploy. And as you can see, even within compute, we have different roles like the web front end, the jobs, the sandbox, and reporting. This is just an example. Again, it's not the whole list of services that we have. We have various microservices that run in a set of islands, and we have to kind of scale this as just like any distributed system that you would think about, right? To further uncover some of the layers on the data side of things, this is not just a database. This is where I kind of want to emphasize and say it's a whole slew of data storage solutions that takes care of all sorts of polyglot data needs that you have. You bring the data, depending on the shape and size of the data, we will pick which place is the right place to put it in. Is it relational data? Is it blob storage for object type of storage, or is it more like your observational data, which is coming from IoT devices or some audit findings and stuff like that, where it's typically write once, read multiple times. So you bring the data and we have the infrastructure that meets the needs of that. And how do we all make it transparent to you and just deal with it through a simple application on the Power App side where you just create a table and it magically goes and sits into these places where my team works on and focuses on. Now, it's also important to kind of say when we talk about Dataverse as a data platform, the key difference between a platform and a product, it supports extensibility. And that's where the story comes a little more interesting, where if you have data somewhere else, if you have engines or parts of your system running in Azure, it's pretty easy to hook it up into Dataverse and make sure your data transformation or digital transformation journey complete, rather than trying to move data between different systems just because you have to make it work in a certain place. So we go and connect to data where it is through connectors and through other API layers that is possible in Dataverse. And that's pretty much how it is. For various reasons, I cannot fit every single infrastructure piece that we deploy here. It's millions of databases, millions of MAU that we support. Yeah. But this will give you an idea of why Dataverse is not just a database and the apple and pineapple kind of a difference that I wanted to call it.
I'm going to use this.
Yeah.
So all of this infrastructure that you just showed deploys as soon as we click new on a Dataverse environment. But how does someone monitor and scale it to make sure that it can keep up with everything they're throwing at it?
I would say it depends on the customer needs here, right? And there are certain business metrics that help us to make that decision initially during the provisioning phase of it. And then eventually it's about the customer experience, right? Drives the kind of scaling needs of the platform. So if you look at here, what we got here, right? Some of the inputs that go in here, and I'm going to talk broadly about the principles that help us make that decision. How many active users does this customer have? Now, obviously, you can't make that decision on day one when the customer is just getting onboarded. And in that case, we use other signals like how many licenses did the customer purchase, or how many applications are going to be used here. The type of the application, the load profile of a typical application, as compared to, like, for example, if you take a typical sales application where somebody's just looking up a lead information, that's a simple CRUD operation that you can think about. But we have the modern day applications which are more about insight, generating customer profile information and stuff like that. In such cases, we have to look at other signals on how are these load patterns different from one application to other. So those inputs or intelligence go into deciding how or which particular infrastructure and how much should we deploy for a particular customer. And then at runtime, once the customer goes live, is the runtime consumption of the services. Like each customer is different. But as customer grows, we want to make sure that as more active users come into the system, we're able to get those signals through resource consumptions and active usage increase and stuff like that. We try to do the scaling up of the infrastructure that is needed here. As you can see, think about these as different infrastructure resource tiers that we got. Right. As customer moves through the journey and as usage increases, we will be moving the customer between these two different tiers. And these tiers are not near real time, but I would say very close to. As soon as we start detecting the resource consumption meters coming up or usage jumping up, we will try to move the customers up the ladder depending on the tier requirements of the system. Now, that often begs a question from the customer: which tier am I in going to be? Do I need to know? Well, I would say no, because the whole point of doing this is basically it stays transparent to you. At the end of the day, you are going to just focus on the performance of the application, and we'll take care of the scaling in and scaling out as needed here.
And so as you're doing this scaling, I know one thing, like if I deploy this in Azure, I'm responsible for scaling and for the cost of that scaling. How does that work with Dataverse?
Again, a great question, I would say, Phil. There is definitely money needed for all the scaling in and scaling out that we're doing here. But to a large extent, we try to absorb all that behind the licensing cost that is already paid upfront for the SaaS applications. The intent here is to make sure the customer is full and mostly comfortable throughout the journey of using the platform and do not have to worry about storage and API, as long as the usage doesn't start to kind of peak after a certain point of time.
And so scaling is one thing, but another common question we get is, what happens when something goes wrong? You know, backup and restore, disaster recovery.
Great question. So we leverage, as you know, Dataverse, as you saw already in the previous slides, that Dataverse runs on Azure, right, and extends with Azure. So there's a few concepts of Azure that I would like to explain and also show how we manage that. This is basically a layout of how typically we put our infrastructure in different Azure regions. So these two, as you see on the top, are like the Azure regions where our entry points are. These two Azure regions typically are always present in a large geography. Within these regions, we have what we call as the Azure zones. And these zones are like data center buildings that are very close by, within a few miles. For redundancy purposes, their power and like water supply and everything is so different that the chances of all of them going down at the same time is kind of eliminated by that. We leverage the Azure zones, like zone availability, or how we make sure that data gets replicated in each zone. And at the same time, as you will see, we take backups and we rely on what is called as Azure globally redundant services, which means it kind of replicates on the Azure side of things to another data center, to another region on another side of the geo. And from there, say disaster strikes and something goes down and offline, we are offline and one of these two zones go down, then we make sure that there is enough capacity on the other side where we can just restore from this backup, or we always have a hot replica, which is continuously replicating the data for you on that side. Failovers is another important topic that comes up often. As you can see, with such kind of large distributed systems, anything can go wrong at any time. And that's why the zones that Azure provides us actually helps us to be highly redundant. and provide that zonal availability so that our applications are distributed in such a way that we will have enough compute spread across all the 3 zones. And similarly, the copies of the database are also kind of actively replicating to all the 3 zones in a center, in a region. So thereby, a failover is so transparent to the end user that they hardly even notice a blip when one of the zones go down or something like that. So that's how we handle failovers in most scenarios.
And now you mentioned how this is replicated between regions. What if I'm in some place where I need to make sure that my data stays within certain geographical boundaries? How do I make sure that's happening?
So we are making sure the product and processes that are being built in this scenario are catering to those compliance needs coming out of these geographies. For example, one of the new regulations around SHREMS, where we are required to keep all the data local to EU boundary, and also not just customer data, but also this data that is produced out of it, like, for example, support data and some of the telemetry data and stuff like that. So Dataverse team and in general Power Platform team is continuously evaluating what are these new regulations coming and continuously changing our product strategy to make sure that we are staying compliant. And just to give you an example with reference to the picture that we were talking about here, these 2 regions that you saw on the left side and the right side, like US East and US West, will always be within the geo boundary of that particular customer. For example, the customer is from Europe. These regions will be like in the UAE North, like EU North, and maybe EU Central kind of a thing. So you're not still crossing the Euro boundary, and we are still able to meet those compliance needs here.
Having Dataverse take care of the changing regulatory environment, make sure that it satisfies it, is just icing on the cake on top of everything else that it provides from scaling and redundancy that you showed.
Right. And then that's important when you build mission critical applications and you trust enterprise data on the cloud. You need to have the peace of mind, and that's what Dataverse is here to provide. And definitely, I would say that that's one of our mission statements on the infrastructure team, to make sure data is safe and secure, and customer privacy is utmost important here.
Sri, thanks so much for taking the time to show us what happens behind the scenes in Dataverse.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Phil, talking to you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Now, before you go, we are making new videos every week. Click this Microsoft logo to subscribe and you'll be the first to see them. And look over here for a couple of videos that can make you a Power Platform expert.